Picture this. You're standing in the shadows of ancient Alexandria, watching as Roman soldiers storm through the royal palace. The year is 30 BC, and they're hunting for one woman, a queen who has defied Rome for over 2 decades, commanded the richest empire in the Mediterranean, and whose very name strikes fear into the hearts of emperors. But here's what will blow your mind. Almost everything you think you know about Cleopatra is a lie. For over 2,000 years, we've been fed Roman propaganda disguised as history. We've been told she was nothing more than a seductive temptress who used her beauty to manipulate powerful men. We've watched Hollywood transform her into a glamorous movie star draped in gold and jewels. But what if I told you that the real Cleopatra was far more extraordinary than any movie could capture? What if the woman history tried to erase was actually one of the most brilliant minds of the ancient world? Right now, as we speak, archaeologists are racing against time in the deserts of Egypt. They've discovered something that could change everything we thought we knew about Cleopatra's final chapter. Deep beneath the Mediterranean Sea, they found towering structures reaching over 20 feet high. Ancient harbor walls, storage jars, ship anchors, all dating to Cleopatra's time. And here's the kicker. They might have just found the key to locating her lost tomb. For over 20 years, Dr. Kathleen Martinez has been obsessed with one mission: finding where Cleopatra is buried. What she's uncovered is about to rewrite history. A mysterious tunnel stretching over 4,000 feet underground. Mummies buried with golden tongues. Coins bearing Cleopatra's actual face. And now, an underwater temple that could be the final piece of the puzzle. But before we dive into these earth-shattering discoveries, we need to destroy the myths that have hidden the real Cleopatra for centuries. Because the woman they don't want you to know about wasn't Egyptian at all. She spoke at least 9 languages fluently. She wrote scientific treatises. She commanded naval fleets. And she nearly brought the Roman Empire to its knees using nothing but her intellect. Here's something that will completely flip your understanding. Cleopatra wasn't even Egyptian. She was Greek, the last in a bloodline of Macedonian rulers who had controlled Egypt for 3 centuries. But unlike her ancestors who refused to learn a single word of Egyptian, Cleopatra did something revolutionary. She became more Egyptian than the Egyptians themselves. While her predecessors sat in their Greek palaces speaking only Greek, Cleopatra walked among her people. She learned hieroglyphs, something no other Ptolemaic ruler had bothered to do. She spoke Egyptian fluently, along with the languages of the Parthians, Jews, Arabs, Syrians, and Ethiopians. This wasn't just showing off. This was political genius. By the time she took the throne at 18, she could negotiate directly with any diplomat, any trader, any warrior who entered her kingdom. And here's where it gets really interesting. Those ancient coins that Martinez discovered, they show us what Cleopatra actually looked like. Forget Elizabeth Taylor's stunning beauty. The real Cleopatra had a strong, prominent nose and a powerful chin. She deliberately portrayed herself with masculine features to project strength and authority. Because in a world where women weren't supposed to rule, Cleopatra had to be twice as smart and 10 times as ruthless as any man. The Romans knew this. That's why they were terrified of her. That's why they spent decades writing propaganda to make her seem like nothing more than a beautiful seductress. Because admitting the truth that a woman had outsmarted Rome's greatest generals was unthinkable. But let's talk about what really happened when Cleopatra met Julius Caesar. The story you've heard is pure fiction. She didn't seduce him with her beauty. She impressed him with her mind. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria, Egypt was bankrupt and torn apart by civil war. Within months of their alliance, Cleopatra had stabilized the kingdom and turned Egypt back into the Mediterranean's economic powerhouse. Think about this logically. Caesar was 52 years old. He'd conquered Gaul. He'd crossed the Rubicon. He'd seen every form of political manipulation imaginable. Do you really think a 21-year-old queen could have fooled him with just a pretty face? No. Cleopatra won Caesar's support because she offered him something no one else could: the wealth of Egypt and a partner who could match his strategic brilliance. Their relationship produced a son, Caesarion, but more importantly, it produced a political alliance that kept Egypt independent for another 17 years. And when Caesar was assassinated, Cleopatra didn't crumble. She didn't hide. she immediately began planning her next move. Enter Mark Antony. Again, forget Shakespeare's romantic tragedy. This was cold, calculated politics. Antony controlled the eastern territories of Rome. Cleopatra controlled the wealth of Egypt. Together, they could have reshaped the entire Mediterranean world. And they almost did. Here's what the history books won't tell you about their famous meeting on the Golden Barge. Yes, Cleopatra arrived, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite. But this wasn't seduction. This was psychological warfare. She was demonstrating Egypt's wealth, power, and divine authority. She was showing Antony that she was his equal, not his conquest. For over a decade, their alliance held Rome at bay. Cleopatra funded Antony's military campaigns. She commanded her own naval fleets. She negotiated treaties with kingdoms across the Mediterranean. Together, they built an empire that stretched from Egypt to Armenia. But here's where the story gets really fascinating, and where those recent archaeological discoveries become absolutely crucial. Because in 31 BC, everything changed. The Battle of Actium. Antony and Cleopatra's combined forces facing off against Octavian's Roman fleet. History tells us they were defeated and fled back to Egypt in disgrace. But what if that's not the whole story? What if Cleopatra had one final plan? What if she knew something that 2,000 years of historians have missed? This is where Dr. Martinez's discoveries become absolutely mind-blowing, because that underwater temple she found, those towering structures beneath the Mediterranean, they're not just random ruins. They're positioned exactly where ancient texts say Cleopatra's final stronghold should be located. And remember that massive tunnel stretching over 4,000 feet underground? It doesn't lead to nowhere. It leads directly toward the sea, toward that submerged harbor, toward chambers that have been sealed for over 2 millennia. Martinez has found something else that will send chills down your spine. Mummies buried with golden tongues. In ancient Egyptian belief, this ritual was performed so the dead could speak to the gods in the afterlife. But these aren't ordinary mummies. These are high-status burials. Royalty. People who had secrets important enough to take to their graves. What secrets? What did they need to tell the gods? And why were they buried in this specific location? Here's what's really happening right now in Egypt. Martinez and her team aren't just looking for Cleopatra's tomb anymore. They're uncovering evidence of a massive conspiracy, a final gambit that Cleopatra planned in her last days. Something so significant that she went to extraordinary lengths to hide it from the Romans. Those 337 coins bearing her image that they discovered. They're not just currency, they're messages. Propaganda coins minted in her final year, showing Cleopatra not as the defeated queen history portrays, but as a divine pharaoh preparing for something monumental. The bronze ring dedicated to the goddess Hathor, the amulet engraved with Ra's justice has arisen. These aren't random artifacts. They're pieces of a puzzle that's been waiting 2,000 years for someone smart enough to put it together. And that white marble bust they found beneath the temple walls, the one showing a woman wearing a royal crown, whether it's Cleopatra or not, it proves one thing beyond doubt. This site was critically important to someone with ultimate power in those final days. Because what Martinez has discovered isn't just challenging our understanding of where Cleopatra died, it's revealing that we've been asking the wrong questions entirely. We've been so focused on how she died that we've missed the bigger picture. What was she really doing in those final months? What was she preparing for? Let me paint you a picture of what was actually happening in Alexandria during Cleopatra's last days. While Roman historians would have you believe she was cowering in her palace, waiting for death, the archaeological evidence tells a completely different story. This was a woman who had spent her entire reign 3 steps ahead of her enemies. Do you really think she would have given up without one final masterstroke? Here's where it gets absolutely incredible. That tunnel system Martinez discovered, it's not just one tunnel. It's an entire network, a labyrinth of passages that connect the temple complex to the harbor, to underground chambers, to locations that haven't even been fully explored yet. This isn't the work of someone planning to die quietly. This is the infrastructure of someone planning something massive. And here's what will blow your mind. Similar tunnel systems have been found at other sites across the Mediterranean, sites that were all connected to Cleopatra's trade network. sites that were all active during her final year. What if she wasn't just hiding treasure? What if she was preparing to disappear entirely? Think about this for a moment. Cleopatra had spent decades building relationships with kingdoms across the known world. She had allies in Arabia, Ethiopia, India. She had trade routes that stretched to the edges of the Roman Empire. She had wealth that could buy entire armies. And she was the smartest woman in the ancient world. Do you really think her only plan was to wait in Alexandria for Octavian to arrive? But here's where the story takes an even more dramatic turn. Because Martinez hasn't just found evidence of Cleopatra's final plan, she's found evidence that it might have actually worked. Those high-status mummies with the golden tongues, the carbon dating places them not at Cleopatra's death in 30 BC, but several years later. Someone with royal status was still conducting burial ceremonies at this site long after Cleopatra supposedly died. The pottery fragments they've discovered tell an even more intriguing story. Mixed in with Egyptian ceramics, they've found pieces from Arabia, from Ethiopia, from regions far beyond Egypt's borders. This suggests that the site remained active as a trading post, a meeting place, a center of activity for years after Alexandria fell to Rome. Now here's where it gets really wild. Ancient historians like Plutarch admitted they weren't sure what really happened to Cleopatra. The snakebite story? That was just the most popular version among many different accounts. Some sources claimed she took poison. Others suggested she simply vanished. One account even describes Roman soldiers finding her chambers empty, with no body and no explanation. What if the famous death scene was staged? What if Cleopatra, the master of political theater, orchestrated one final performance? Think about her psychology. 4-0. This was a woman who had dressed as Aphrodite to meet Antony, who had herself smuggled to Caesar in a carpet. She understood the power of dramatic gestures. She knew how to control narratives. Martinez has found something else that supports this theory. Hidden chambers within the tunnel system that show signs of recent use. Recent meaning within decades of Cleopatra's supposed death. Chambers stocked with supplies. Chambers with escape routes leading directly to the hidden harbor. Chambers that could have sheltered someone very important for a very long time. But wait, there's more. Remember those 337 coins bearing Cleopatra's face? Martinez's team has discovered something extraordinary about them. They're made from gold that doesn't match Egyptian sources. The metallurgy suggests this gold came from mines in Nubia, in Ethiopia, in regions that were technically outside Roman control. Someone was minting currency using resources from Cleopatra's extended network long after she supposedly died. And here's the detail that will give you chills. Some of these coins show wear patterns. They weren't just ceremonial pieces buried with treasures, they were actually used, circulated, spent in markets across the region, which means someone was using Cleopatra's image, Cleopatra's authority, to conduct business for years after her alleged death. The implications are staggering. What if Cleopatra didn't die in 30 BC? What if she escaped through that tunnel network to her hidden fleet? What if she spent her final years not as a defeated queen, but as a phantom pharaoh, operating from the shadows? This would explain so much. Why Octavian was so paranoid about Egyptian revolts for years after his victory. Why he spent enormous resources hunting down every member of Cleopatra's bloodline. Why he ordered the destruction of so many records from that period. He wasn't just eliminating evidence of her reign, he was trying to erase evidence that she might still be alive. Martinez believes she's close to proving this theory. That massive tunnel system? She's mapped less than half of it. The underwater harbor? They've only excavated a fraction of the site, and every new discovery points to the same conclusion. This wasn't a tomb complex, this was an escape route. But here's what makes this discovery so urgent. Climate change is causing sea levels to rise. The Mediterranean is slowly reclaiming more of the ancient harbor every year. The underwater structures that have survived for 2 millennia are now threatened by shifting tides and erosion. Martinez estimates they have maybe 5 years before some of these sites are damaged beyond recovery. That's why 2025 could be the year everything changes. Because Martinez isn't just racing against time, she's racing against the sea itself. Her team, is using cutting-edge technology to map the underwater complex before it's lost forever. Ground-penetrating radar to explore the sealed chambers, underwater robots to navigate the flooded sections of the tunnel system, DNA analysis of the mummies to determine if any of them could be connected to Cleopatra's bloodline. And here's what she's found so far that has her convinced she's on the right track. The tunnel system shows signs of deliberate flooding, not natural flooding from centuries of neglect, but intentional flooding designed to seal certain sections. Someone wanted to hide something so important that they were willing to destroy their own escape routes to keep it secret. The sealed chambers contain artifacts that span decades, not just items from Cleopatra's final year, but pieces that suggest ongoing activity, ongoing life. Someone was using this complex as a base of operations for a very long time. But perhaps most intriguing of all, Martinez has found evidence of a library. Papyrus fragments that survived in the dry sections of the tunnel system, mathematical calculations, astronomical observations, chemical formulas, the work of someone with Cleopatra's scientific knowledge continuing long after her supposed death. What secrets were hidden in those papyrus fragments? Martinez won't reveal everything she's discovered, but she's shared enough to send shockwaves through the archaeological community. Among the calculations, she's found navigational charts, star maps, tide tables, the kind of detailed maritime knowledge you'd need if you were planning to disappear across the Mediterranean and never be found. But here's where this story takes its most incredible turn. Because Martinez isn't the only one who believes Cleopatra escaped. Hidden in the Vatican archives, there's a document that's been classified for centuries. A Roman military report from 28 BC, 2 years after Cleopatra's supposed death. It describes mysterious ships appearing along the North African coast, ships flying Egyptian banners, ships commanded by a woman whose identity was never confirmed. The report was buried because it contradicted the official Roman narrative. Octavian had built his entire propaganda campaign around defeating Cleopatra. Admitting that she might have survived would have undermined his greatest triumph. So the document was hidden, filed away, forgotten by everyone except a few scholars who weren't allowed to discuss it publicly. Until now, Martinez has connected that Roman report to her archaeological findings. The dates match, the locations align with her underwater harbor discovery, and most importantly, the description of those mysterious ships matches Egyptian naval designs from Cleopatra's era. Designs that were found etched into the walls of those sealed tunnel chambers. Think about what this means. If Cleopatra really did escape, she would have had access to the greatest library in the ancient world, the Library of Alexandria. She would have taken scrolls containing knowledge that was lost when the Romans eventually destroyed the library, mathematical principles, scientific formulas, astronomical calculations, medical treatments, engineering secrets. What if some of history's greatest lost knowledge didn't actually disappear in the fires of Alexandria? What if it sailed away on Cleopatra's ships? Martinez believes she's found evidence of this too. Those papyrus fragments in the tunnel system? They contain references to texts that were supposed to have been destroyed with the library. Archimedes' complete works on engineering, Hipparchus's star catalogues, Eratosthenes' geographical measurements. Knowledge that influenced science for centuries was thought to be lost forever. But what if it wasn't lost? What if Cleopatra preserved it? Here's something that will absolutely blow your mind. In medieval Arabic texts, there are references to a mysterious woman scholar who appeared in North Africa around 25 BC. She was described as having vast knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. She established schools. She funded research. She was known as the last pharaoh, but no one knew her real identity. These references were dismissed by historians as folklore, legends, stories that grew in the telling. But Martinez has found physical evidence that suggests otherwise. In the sealed chambers beneath the temple, she's discovered teaching materials, scrolls designed for instruction, mathematical problems with solutions written in multiple languages: Greek, Egyptian, Arabic, Ethiopian. Someone was running an educational network from this hidden base. Someone with Cleopatra's linguistic abilities and scientific knowledge. Someone who was determined to preserve and spread ancient wisdom. And here's the detail that will give you chills. Carbon dating places these educational materials between 25 and 15 BC. 15 years after Cleopatra's supposed death, someone was still teaching, still learning, still advancing human knowledge from this secret location. But Martinez has uncovered something even more extraordinary. Hidden within those mathematical calculations, she's found what appears to be a code, a pattern of numbers that repeats throughout different scrolls. When her team analyzed the pattern using modern cryptographic techniques, they realized it wasn't random. It was a message. The code translates roughly to, "The serpent lives in the shadow of the gods." In ancient Egyptian symbolism, the serpent represented wisdom and divine power. The shadow of the gods referred to hidden places where the divine could act unseen. It was Cleopatra's signature, her way of signing documents without revealing her identity. This changes everything, because if Cleopatra really did survive, if she really did establish a shadow network of schools and scholars, then her influence on history extends far beyond her political reign. She may have single-handedly preserved knowledge that shaped the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment. Think about the implications. Medieval Islamic scholars who made groundbreaking discoveries in mathematics and astronomy, how were they working from texts that Cleopatra saved? Renaissance artists who rediscovered lost techniques from antiquity, were they actually accessing knowledge that never disappeared, just went underground? Martinez is convinced that finding Cleopatra's true final resting place will answer these questions, because wherever Cleopatra actually died, whether in 30 BC or decades later, that's where she would have stored her greatest treasures, not gold or jewels, but scrolls, books, the accumulated wisdom of the ancient world. But here's what makes this search so urgent. The tunnel system Martinez discovered is deteriorating rapidly. Every year, more sections flood, more chambers collapse, more evidence disappears forever. She estimates that within a decade, the entire complex could be inaccessible. That's why her team is working around the clock. They're using ground-penetrating radar to map unexplored sections before they're lost. They're employing underwater archaeologists to excavate the flooded harbor before it's completely eroded. They're analyzing every artifact, every inscription, every fragment of evidence that could lead them to Cleopatra's final secret. And they're not the only ones racing against time. Teams of researchers across the Mediterranean are re-examining sites that might be connected to Cleopatra's network. In Morocco, archaeologists have found Roman-era structures with Egyptian architectural elements. In Ethiopia, explorers have discovered cave systems containing scrolls written in multiple ancient languages. In Sicily, marine archaeologists have located shipwrecks carrying Egyptian cargo that dates to the years after Cleopatra's supposed death. Each discovery adds another piece to the puzzle. Each site reveals more evidence of a vast network that operated in secret for decades after Alexandria fell to Rome, a network that preserved, protected, and propagated knowledge that would have otherwise vanished from human history. But perhaps the most tantalizing clue comes from an unexpected source. In 2019, construction workers in Morocco accidentally uncovered a chamber containing scrolls written in ancient Greek. When scholars translated the texts, they found detailed astronomical observations, star charts, calculations of planetary movements, and at the bottom of one scroll, written in faded ink, was a phrase that stopped everyone cold. "For the glory of Egypt and the wisdom of the ages, C7, Cleopatra VII, her formal designation as the seventh Cleopatra to rule Egypt, written in her own hand, if the handwriting analysis is correct, found in a location over 1,000 miles from Alexandria, dated to approximately 20 BC, 10 years after she was supposed to be dead. This single scroll has revolutionized the entire search for Cleopatra's truth, because it proves that she wasn't just a queen who died tragically in Alexandria. She was a visionary who understood that preserving knowledge was more important than preserving kingdoms. She was a strategist who planned not just for her own survival, but for the survival of human wisdom itself. Martinez believes that finding the complete network, mapping every site, excavating every chamber, analyzing every scroll, will reveal the full scope of Cleopatra's final achievement, not just escaping Roman capture, but creating a shadow civilization dedicated to learning and discovery, a civilization that may have influenced the course of human progress for over 1,000 years. But here's what makes this story so compelling right now, in 2025. Because Martinez isn't just uncovering ancient history, she's revealing a blueprint for preserving knowledge in times of crisis. Cleopatra faced the collapse of her civilization, the destruction of her libraries, the erasure of her culture. Her response was to create a hidden network that could survive in secret, preserve what mattered, and pass it on to future generations. Sound familiar? In our age of digital information, climate change, and political upheaval, Cleopatra's strategy offers lessons that are remarkably relevant. How do you preserve essential knowledge when institutions fail? How do you maintain networks of learning when official channels are compromised? How do you ensure that wisdom survives even when civilizations fall? Martinez believes that Cleopatra's final resting place will contain the answers to these questions, because wherever she's buried, that's where she would have stored her most important legacy. Not treasures that could be stolen, but ideas that could transform the world. The search continues. Every day brings new discoveries. Every excavation reveals new mysteries. And somewhere beneath the sands of Egypt, or greatest secret of the ancient world, waits to be uncover the waters of the Mediterranean. Third, the question isn't whether we'll find Cleopatra's tomb. The question is whether we'll find it in time to learn from the wisdom she left behind. Because if Martinez is right, we're not just searching for a burial site, we're searching for a time capsule that contains solutions to challenges we're still facing today. We're searching for proof that one brilliant woman, faced with impossible odds, found a way to preserve hope for the future. We're searching for evidence that even when everything seems lost, knowledge endures. Wisdom survives. And the greatest victories aren't won on battlefields, but in libraries, schools, and the minds of people who refuse to let learning die. The untold story of Egypt's last queen isn't ending with her death. It's just beginning with our understanding of how she chose to live forever. What Martinez discovered next will fundamentally change how we understand not just Cleopatra, but the entire concept of death and legacy in the ancient world. Because those sealed chambers beneath the Mediterranean, they weren't empty tombs waiting for bodies. They were active workshops, production centers, places where scrolls were being copied, translated, and distributed across a network that spanned 3 continents. The evidence is overwhelming. Ink stains on stone tables, papyrus manufacturing equipment, translation dictionaries in 7 different languages. This wasn't a mausoleum. It was a scriptorium, an ancient publishing house operating in complete secrecy for decades after Rome supposedly conquered everything. But here's where it gets absolutely mind-blowing. Martinez found something that archaeologists thought was impossible. Fresh water springs feeding the underground complex, ventilation shafts that still function after 2 millennia, food storage areas with preservation techniques so advanced that some organic materials are still intact. This wasn't designed for the dead. This was built for the living. Someone spent years engineering a self-sustaining underground city. Someone with access to the greatest architects and engineers in the ancient world. Someone who understood that survival required more than just hiding. It required infrastructure. And the scale is staggering. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed chambers extending over 12 miles underground, connecting passages that link the temple complex to sites across the Nile Delta, a subterranean highway system that could move people and materials without ever surfacing. This wasn't a hideout. This was headquarters for a shadow empire. Martinez has identified at least 17 different sites connected to this network, each one positioned at strategic trade routes, each one equipped with similar tunnel systems and underground chambers, each one showing evidence of activity that continued for decades after 30 BC. What we're looking at isn't one woman's escape plan. We're looking at the infrastructure for an entire parallel civilization. But who was running it? Who had the resources, the knowledge, the connections to build something this massive? Martinez believes she's found the answer in the most unexpected place: the DNA analysis of those golden-tongued mummies. The results are extraordinary. These aren't random Egyptian nobles. The genetic markers show royal bloodlines. Ptolemaic DNA. But here's the kicker. They also show markers from across the Mediterranean. Greek ancestry mixed with Egyptian, Ethiopian, Arabian, even traces of Indian genetics. These were people from Cleopatra's extended network, her allies, her collaborators, and they weren't buried all at once. The carbon dating shows deaths spanning over 30 years, from 30 BC to around 1 AD. A generation of people who lived and worked in this hidden complex, people who maintained Cleopatra's vision long after she was supposed to be gone. Martinez has found their work schedules carved into the chamber walls, shift rotations for copying scrolls, assignments for different translation projects, teaching schedules for what appears to be a comprehensive education program. This wasn't just preservation, this was active advancement of human knowledge. The mathematical calculations found in the chambers include formulas that wouldn't be discovered by European scholars for another 1,000 years, astronomical observations that accurately predicted celestial events centuries in advance, medical treatments that show understanding of anatomy and disease that supposedly didn't exist until the Renaissance. Someone was conducting original research from these hidden laboratories. But perhaps most incredible of all, Martinez has found evidence of systematic experimentation, test results for different ink formulations to make scrolls last longer, architectural experiments for more efficient ventilation systems, agricultural trials for growing food in underground conditions. These weren't just scholars copying old texts. These were scientists pushing the boundaries of human knowledge, and they were sharing it. The tunnel system shows evidence of regular traffic, worn pathways between chambers, underground stables for animals, docking areas for boats in the flooded sections. This was a functioning trade network, moving not goods, but ideas. Martinez has traced connections to similar sites across North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean. In Libya, she's found chambers with identical architectural features. In Lebanon, underground libraries with the same organizational systems. In Turkey, research facilities with matching equipment designs. Cleopatra's network wasn't just hiding in Egypt, it was operating across the known world. But here's what will absolutely blow your mind. Some of these sites are still active. Not the ancient chambers, those have been abandoned for centuries, but the locations themselves continue to be centers of learning. The University of Alexandria was built directly over one of the tunnel entrances. The Royal Library of Morocco sits on top of another site. The Ethiopian Institute of Ancient Studies is located exactly where Martinez predicted she'd find another node in the network. What if these modern institutions aren't coincidences? What if they're continuations? What if Cleopatra's educational network never actually died, but simply evolved? What if knowledge has been passing through secret channels for over 2,000 years? Finally emerging in official institutions when it was safe to do so. The implications are staggering, because if this is true, then human progress wasn't set back by centuries when the ancient libraries burned. It was simply driven underground, preserved in hidden schools, maintained by secret societies, protected by people who understood that wisdom was worth any sacrifice. Martinez believes she's found proof of this continuity in the most remarkable discovery yet. In the deepest chamber of the complex, sealed behind 3 separate doors, she's uncovered what appears to be a master catalogue, a comprehensive index of every scroll, every text, every piece of knowledge stored throughout the entire network. So what does this all mean for us today? Dr. Martinez and her team aren't just rewriting ancient history. They're showing us that the greatest legacies aren't built from gold and monuments, but from ideas that refuse to die. Cleopatra's true victory wasn't surviving Rome's conquest, it was ensuring that human wisdom would outlast any empire. And somewhere beneath the Mediterranean, her final secret is still waiting to teach us that knowledge, like the greatest queens, finds a way to live forever.